The flickering gaslights of the year 1877 cast long, dancing shadows across the polished pews and solemn faces gathered for a rare photographic moment. It was a time when capturing an image was an event, a significant undertaking demanding stillness and patience, a stark contrast to the instantaneous snapshots of today. This particular photograph, taken within the hushed sanctity of a quaint, isolated village church, appeared at first glance utterly ordinary. A group of villagers dressed in their Sunday best stood or sat with rigid posture, their expressions ranging from slightly apprehensive to quietly reverent, all bathed in the muted light filtering through stained glass windows. The scene was one of serene piety, a perfect encapsulation of rural life from a bygone era, preserved in sepia tones on fragile paper. For those of us fascinated by the echoes of the past, historical photographs are more than just faded images. They are tangible portals, whispers from generations long departed, inviting us to peer into their world, to decipher their stories, to feel the very texture of their existence, each crease, each subtle shift in light. Every tiny detail holds a potential secret, a fragment of truth waiting to be unearthed. It's this profound sense of connection, this thrill of discovery that drew Arthur to the dusty shelves of forgotten antique shops, to the musty scent of old paper and the quiet promise of untold narratives. Arthur, a young man with an insatiable curiosity and an academic rigor that belied his amateur status, was renowned among a small circle of history enthusiasts for his almost preternatural ability to spot anomalies, to see beyond the obvious, to peel back the layers of time. He approached each artifact not just as an object, but as a silent witness, a potential informant of forgotten events. It was on a particularly cold and rainy Tuesday, a day perfect for indoor pursuits, that Arthur stumbled upon it. Tucked away in the back corner of an antique shop notorious for its disorganized treasures, nestled between a tarnished silver locket and a brittle leather-bound diary, lay the photograph. It was unframed, slightly dog-eared at the corners, and bore the faint scent of age. The church scene was instantly captivating in its simple elegance, a microcosm of a world long gone. He purchased it for a paltry sum, his intuition tingling with an unnamed sensation, a subtle hum of significance that often preceded his most compelling discoveries. Back in his small, cluttered study, bathed in the glow of his desk lamp, Arthur began his ritualistic examination. Magnifying glass in hand, he meticulously scanned every inch of the image, his trained eye seeking out the minute imperfections, the accidental details that often held the most profound insights. He spent hours, lost in the intricate patterns of the villagers' clothing, the architectural nuances of the church, the play of light and shadow. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly aligned with the photographic techniques and social customs of the late 19th century. Yet a persistent, almost imperceptible whisper at the back of his mind urged him to look closer, to scrutinize just a little more intently. His gaze drifted to a large, ornate mirror positioned on the far wall of the church, its frame intricately carved, its surface catching and reflecting a distorted miniature version of the congregation. And that's when he saw it. A flicker, a shift, an anomaly so subtle, so profoundly unsettling, that it sent a shiver racing down his spine despite the warmth of his study. Within the reflection of the glass, among the blurred visages of the reflected parishioners, a child's face stared back. It was a young girl, perhaps no older than 7 or 8, her hair neatly parted, her small hands clasped in front of her. Her expression in the direct image was one of solemnity, a quiet seriousness befitting the occasion and the somber setting. But in the mirror's reflection, her face held something else entirely. It was fleeting, easily dismissed as an optical illusion or a trick of the light, but Arthur's keen eye registered it with chilling clarity. The subtle alteration in her smile, a faint, almost imperceptible upturn of the corners of her mouth, transitioned from an innocent, demure half smile to something else, something knowing, something deeply, profoundly out of place. It was the kind of detail that most would overlook, a ghost in the machine of the past, but for Arthur, it was a siren call, an irresistible invitation to delve deeper. This was no mere photographic quirk. This was a riddle etched into the very fabric of history, a smile and a reflection, shifting just enough to hint at a secret, a silent scream across the chasm of time. This image, initially so serene, now held a disturbing secret threatening to unravel the quiet dignity of its 1877 origins. What could explain such an unsettling discrepancy? What unseen force was at play in that moment, captured forever in a beam of light? Join Arthur, and together let us peel back the layers of this historical enigma, for some secrets refuse to stay buried, especially when they are reflected back at us from a forgotten past. Arthur's initial fascination with the peculiar photographic anomaly quickly deepened into an intense, almost obsessive dedication. The subtle distortion in the reflection, initially glimpsed as a flicker of unease, now demanded his full attention. He returned to his makeshift digital darkroom, a corner of his small study cluttered with scanners, monitors, and an array of historical texts, and began a meticulous examination, a forensic deep dive into the photographic ether of 1877. His fingers danced across the keyboard, coaxing sophisticated digital enhancement software to perform its magic on the high-resolution scan of the antique print. Each pixel became a universe under his scrutiny. He zoomed in, pushing the boundaries of photographic fidelity until the mirror's surface, once a blurry backdrop, resolved into startling clarity. The child's face, framed by old stone and somber adults, indeed held a peculiar stillness in the primary image. Yet, in the silvery expanse of the mirror, a different narrative unfolded. As Arthur digitally isolated and magnified the reflection alone, staggering permutations began to manifest. It wasn't an instantaneous transformation, but a series of micro-expressions, a spectral stop-motion sequence only visible through intense scrutiny and iterative adjustments to exposure and contrast. He saw it, undeniably. The child's mouth in the reflection, initially a neutral line reflecting the solemnity of the occasion, began to curve upwards. Not a gentle, innocent half-smile, but a slow, deliberate twist that stretched the corners of the lips, elongating the face in a way that was utterly unnatural. It was a smile that didn't reach the eyes, a chillingly empty gesture that seemed less human and more like a cruel mimicry of joy. With each incremental enhancement, the grin widened, the eyes, still strangely vacant, seeming to darken, or perhaps it was just the trick of light and shadow playing within the aged emulsion. The air in Arthur's study grew colder, despite the hum of his computer and the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. He felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. This wasn't a photographic artifact, a lens flare, or a trick of perspective. This was something deliberate, something that defied the very laws of physics and the static nature of historical photography. His rational mind, honed by years of sifting through historical data and debunking urban legends, screamed for a logical explanation. But his gut, the primal instinct that often guided true discovery, whispered of something far more unsettling. The primary obstacle wasn't a tangible antagonist, a shadowy figure lurking in the background. It was the sheer terrifying ambiguity of the anomaly itself. The very idea that an image fixed in time could possess such an evolving, malevolent detail seemed preposterous. He grappled with the profound fear of being dismissed, not just by the academic community, but by anyone he dared to share this with. The historical society, his colleagues, even his closest friends, they would surely attribute it to overactive imagination, digital manipulation on his part, or merely an optical illusion born from staring too long at a century-old image. The potential for ridicule, for having his meticulous reputation tarnished by what sounded like a ghost story, weighed heavily on him. He felt an intense isolation, a burden of witnessing something that seemed to exist outside the realm of accepted reality. Driven by a desperate need for a mundane explanation, Arthur cast a wide net in his research. He spent countless hours scouring online archives, digital libraries, and obscure genealogical websites, searching for other copies of the photograph. He hoped to find another print, perhaps one less faded, that might reveal a prosaic cause for the shifting reflection, a smudge on the glass, a peculiar angle of light, or even a different child altogether. He delved into the history of early photographic techniques, hoping to uncover some arcane process that could yield such a bizarre result. Could it be a double exposure? A primitive form of photo manipulation? He examined daguerreotypes, tintypes, and ambrotypes, studying their inherent flaws and quirks, but found nothing that remotely explained the phenomenon he was witnessing. The distinct, almost predatory nature of the smile, its gradual emergence within the reflection, defied all known photographic principles of the era. He even researched the church itself, hoping to find records of multiple sittings or re-photographing events. But the village was remote, its history sparsely documented, and the church records, if they still existed, were likely lost to time or decay. His efforts to find a logical, scientific, or even simply human explanation for the shifting image were fruitless. Each dead end only amplified the unsettling truth. What he saw in the mirror's reflection was not an error. It was intentional. It was alive, in a terrifying, ethereal sense within the confines of the photograph. The child's smile in that reflective surface was not merely a static image. It was a silent, evolving declaration, a chilling secret whispering from the past, challenging Arthur's understanding of reality and history itself. The more he looked, the more the smile seemed to mock his desperate search for reason, cementing its place as an unexplainable, deeply unnerving anomaly that beckoned him deeper into its unsettling history. Arthur's detailed digital scans had peeled back layers of photographic emulsion, revealing a story far more intricate and unsettling than he could have ever imagined. The oscillating smile of the child in the mirror, shifting from a demure, almost melancholic set of lips to a wide, unnerving grin, continued to haunt his waking thoughts and pervade his dreams. It was an impossible anomaly, a defiance of static reality caught on a silver halide plate, and it screamed for an explanation that transcended the mundane. His previous attempts to locate other copies of the photograph had yielded nothing, deepening the enigma. The sheer uniqueness of this particular print, found tucked away in a dusty box of forgotten ephemera, began to suggest a singularity that unnerved him more than any supernatural whisper. It wasn't just a photograph, it felt like a deliberate pronouncement, a lingering echo from the past demanding to be heard. Driven by an insatiable hunger for answers, Arthur broadened his research, moving beyond the immediate confines of the photograph itself to delve into the history of the church and the isolated village it served. He spent countless hours poring over digitized parish records, local newspaper archives, and obscure historical society journals, all housed within the vast, silent digital libraries of the internet. The village, identified through faded notations on the photo's brittle backing, was called Oakhaven, a name that evoked a sense of pastoral tranquility, utterly at odds with the unsettling image he now possessed. What he unearthed was a tapestry woven with threads of quiet desolation. Oakhaven, nestled deep within a forgotten valley, had once been a small but thriving community, sustained by agriculture and a nearby stream that powered a small mill. However, around the very time the photograph was taken in 1877, a palpable shift occurred. The records, though sparse, began to hint at a series of misfortunes that transcended typical rural hardships. He found entries detailing an unusual number of inexplicable disappearances, especially among the village's younger population. Not a great plague or famine, but rather a slow, insidious drain of life. Children, then teenagers, simply vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only bewildered families and increasingly anxious neighbors. The entries were often terse, almost clinical, reflecting perhaps the village clerk's own struggle to articulate the unexplainable. Beneath the surface of official records, Arthur detected a growing undercurrent of fear and superstition amongst the villagers. Mentions of bad luck, the shadowed path, and the whisperer by the water became more frequent in the anecdotal accounts he pieced together from old letters and diaries. The prosperity of Oakhaven seemed to wane, and by the turn of the century the village was all but abandoned, its residents having fled a creeping dread they couldn't articulate, let alone fight. The church, once the heart of the community, stood as a silent sentinel to its slow demise. As Arthur connected these disturbing dots, a profound unease settled within him. The smiling child in the reflection began to feel less like a mere anomaly and more like a pivotal piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. He found himself questioning his own rational mind, a mind honed by years of rigorous historical analysis. Could he truly be contemplating the supernatural? Was he allowing a single peculiar image to warp his perception of historical fact into something akin to folklore? The thought was unsettling, challenging the very bedrock of his academic training. He grappled with the insidious possibility that what he was witnessing defied scientific explanation, pushing him into a realm where history and haunting intertwined. This internal conflict gnawed at him, yet he couldn't deny the mounting evidence. The inexplicable disappearances, the subtle shift in village records, and most potently, the impossible smile in the mirror all pointed to something beyond the ordinary. He began to feel a strange kinship with the vanished villagers, a creeping understanding of the dread that must have driven them from their homes. Then came the first true breakthrough, a thread of local lore buried deep within a regional ethnographic study compiled in the early 20th century. It was a footnote, almost an aside in a chapter discussing superstitions of the rural populace. It spoke of a local legend particular to the Oakhaven area concerning a mirror sprite, or reflection trickster. This entity, the legend claimed, was not inherently malicious, but deeply mischievous, feeding on human anxieties and often manifesting in reflective surfaces, particularly those in places of spiritual significance like churches. It was said to mimic human emotions, twisting them into grotesque parodies, often in the presence of vulnerable souls, especially children. The legend described the trickster as having a particular fondness for smiles, altering them in reflections to sow seeds of doubt and fear. Sometimes it would even lure individuals, particularly the young and impressionable, away from their reflections into a distorted reality that existed just beyond the glass. This revelation sent a shiver down Arthur's spine. It clicked into place with the image, with the disappearances, with the growing sense of dread. The seemingly innocent smile, morphing into something chillingly wide, now had a name, a context, and a terrifying purpose. It was no longer just an anomaly, it was a signature, a mocking declaration from an entity that had preyed on Oakhaven, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. The photograph, he now realized, was not just a record of a past moment, but a haunting, immutable testament to a malevolent presence frozen in time, a presence that now seemed to reach out across the decades, beckoning him closer. The photograph, now framed and placed on his study desk, had become less an object of academic curiosity and more a focal point for something far stranger, something that seeped into the very air around him. Arthur found himself increasingly susceptible to peculiar occurrences within his usually ordered home. The first subtle hints began with the lights, flickering sporadically, not with the predictable surge of an old circuit, but with a rhythmic, almost conscious pulse. It was as if the electrical current itself was drawing breath, responding to an unseen presence. Then came the whispers, faint at first, easily dismissed as the creaks and groans of an old house settling, or the rustle of leaves outside his window. But they grew, coalescing into indistinct murmurs just beyond the threshold of understanding, their source always seeming to originate near the study, near the photograph. A more visceral manifestation soon followed. The scent. An unmistakable aroma of old wood and dust, mingled with something faintly metallic, like forgotten iron, would waft through the room, clinging to the air for moments before dissipating as quickly as it appeared. It was the smell of Oakhaven, he realized, the very essence of that forgotten church, now somehow transposed into his own sanctuary. He documented each instance meticulously, not with fear, but with a growing, almost detached sense of observation. These weren't hallucinations, he convinced himself. They were empirical data, further proof that the photograph was indeed a conduit, a gateway, and that the entity within it was far from dormant. He felt its presence, a cold spot in the room even on warm evenings, a subtle pressure at the back of his neck when his gaze lingered on the mirror's reflection in the image. Driven by a need to validate his experiences, to break free from the isolation of his singular pursuit, Arthur attempted to reach out. He contacted a few esteemed colleagues within the Historical Society, carefully phrasing his observations, hinting at an unusual photographic anomaly and peculiar associated phenomena. He spoke of historical records of disappearance and local folklore, omitting the more supernatural details to maintain a semblance of academic rigor. The responses were polite, professional, and utterly dismissive. One suggested he might be experiencing research fatigue. Another recommended a sabbatical. A well-meaning friend, a self-proclaimed paranormal enthusiast, listened with a blend of feigned interest and thinly veiled condescension, ultimately suggesting he simply had an overactive imagination, perhaps fueled by too many late nights. The encounters reinforced Arthur's isolation, cementing the understanding that this was a journey he had to undertake alone, unburdened by skepticism that bordered on ridicule. Undeterred, Arthur dove back into the historical archives, focusing now not just on the church's grim history, but on the individuals depicted within the photograph. He understood that the entity, the reflection trickster, seemed to thrive on human connection, on the very presence of life. If the child's smile was its signature, then the child herself was central to the mystery. Days bled into weeks, spent poring over digitized parish registers, census records, and local newspaper archives. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes scanning endless lines of faded script, searching for a name, a family, any trace of the young girl who held the key to this unfolding enigma. Finally, after countless dead ends and frustrating detours, a faded entry in a local birth registry caught his eye. Ilara Vance, born April 12, 1872, daughter of Thomas and Mary Vance, Oakhaven Village. Cross-referencing with the 1881 census, he found the Vance family, but Ilara was conspicuously absent. Further digging revealed a brief, almost clinical notice in a regional gazette from 1878, detailing the unexplained disappearance of a young girl, Ilara Vance, aged 6, from the remote village of Oakhaven. The timing was chilling. The photograph, dated 1877, placed Ilara in the picture just months before her vanishing. A wave of profound sadness washed over Arthur as he stared at the screen. Ilara. A name to put to the innocent face, a name now inextricably linked with the chilling smile in the mirror. She wasn't just a subject in an old photograph. She was a real child whose life had been cut short, whose memory had been swallowed by time and a malevolent presence. The academic detachment he had carefully cultivated began to crumble. This was no longer just a historical puzzle. It was a tragedy, a cold case spanning a century, now laid bare before him. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to understand what had happened to Ilara, and to somehow, even across the vast chasm of time, bring a measure of peace to her restless spirit. The entity in the mirror, the trickster, now had a victim, and Arthur, by naming her, had drawn closer to the heart of its century-old game. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the photograph was not merely a record of Alara's last known moments, but a continuing testament to her fate, and perhaps a silent plea for help. The whispers in his study seemed to intensify. The scent of old wood and dust grew stronger, almost beckoning him deeper into Alara's forgotten story. Arthur, armed with the horrifying realization that the shifting smile was the signature of a malevolent entity, returned to the photograph with a renewed, almost desperate focus. The child's identity, Alara, haunted him, her innocent face now imbued with the tragedy of her vanishing. He meticulously scrutinized every pixel, every shadow, every seemingly innocuous detail within the antique image. His powerful digital magnification tools, usually reserved for deciphering faded script or identifying obscure architectural details, became instruments of a ghostly archaeological dig. He spent countless hours poring over the image, his eyes burning, his mind racing, searching for anything. Any overlooked inscription, any hidden symbol, any faint marker that could shed further light on Alara's fate and the nature of her captor. It was during one such exhaustive session, deep into the night, that he stumbled upon it. His gaze, guided by an intuition born of obsession, settled on the rough-hewn wooden pews in the background, specifically the one closest to the mirror's reflection. To the naked eye, even under moderate magnification, they appeared as nothing more than weathered planks, scarred by years of congregational use. But as he pushed the digital zoom to its absolute limit, adjusting contrast and sharpness repeatedly, a faint pattern began to emerge from the grain of the wood. It wasn't immediately apparent. It was less a carving and more an etching, almost part of the wood's natural texture, as if intended to be overlooked by casual observers. With painstaking effort, he painstakingly enhanced the area. Slowly, painfully, the blurred lines resolved into distinct shapes. A series of interlocking geometric figures interspersed with what appeared to be stylized branches or roots. They were small, no larger than a child's thumbprint, and positioned strategically along the top edge of the pew, almost hidden by the subtle play of light and shadow in the original photograph. These weren't decorative carvings. They possessed an intentionality, a deliberate placement that spoke of purpose beyond mere ornamentation. A jolt of recognition, cold and sharp, shot through Arthur. He'd seen these before, or at least something remarkably similar, during his earlier, broader research into local folklore and protective practices. His mind, now a repository of obscure historical tidbits, immediately flipped through its mental index. These faint symbols, almost imperceptible, were not random. They were ancient protective wards, specifically designed against malevolent spirits and entities that preyed on human vulnerabilities. They were often referred to in old texts as spirit traps or reflection binders, intended to ward off or contain mischievous, often dangerous, entities that manifested in reflections or thresholds. The discovery sent a fresh wave of chills down his spine, a more profound fear than any he had experienced before. It wasn't just a legend anymore. It was a testament to the church's inhabitants' awareness, their desperate attempts to protect themselves from something truly sinister. The presence of these wards carved into the very furniture of the church implied a knowledge of the reflection trickster that went far beyond casual superstition. It suggested a long-standing active struggle, a living history of dread that the villagers had sought to combat with their own arcane safeguards. They knew. They had known what lurked there, what fed on dreams and snatched away children. The church, rather than being a sanctuary, was a battleground, and these carvings were the silent, desperate prayers of a community under siege. This revelation completely reframed his understanding of the photograph, and more terrifyingly, of the entity within it. The shifting smile, initially interpreted as mere mischief, now acquired a chilling new dimension. It was not simply a trick, a playful taunt. It was a sneer of triumph, a declaration of victory over the very wards meant to contain it. The entity had overcome their defenses, broken their circles, and claimed its prize. The smile in the reflection, morphing from solemnity to a grotesque grin, was a silent mocking of the futile efforts of the villagers, a triumphant acknowledgement of its successful predation. It wasn't just mischievous, it was profoundly malevolent, a silent taunt from something that had not only claimed Alara but had done so with an almost theatrical disdain for the protective measures in place. Arthur felt a visceral pang of grief for Alara. She wasn't merely a statistic, another name in a list of disappearances. She was a child, her life brutally cut short, her image forever trapped in a chilling game played by an unseen horror. The smile, once a source of intellectual curiosity, now emanated a palpable sense of triumph and profound malice, a silent mocking testament to Alara's tragic fate. It was a cruel, defiant grin, a declaration of ownership, a constant reminder that the entity had won, and that it continued to exert its dark influence through the timeless image. The photograph was no longer just an anomaly, it was a historical artifact imbued with a living malevolence, a portal through which the entity seemed to radiate its chilling presence, its victory etched into the very fabric of time. The protective wards, now deciphered, only underscored the depth of the horror, revealing a community that had known terror intimately, a terror that resonated through the decades, arriving now at Arthur's doorstep, staring back at him from the eyes of a lost child. The weight of the legend, combined with the undeniable evidence etched into the photograph, solidified Arthur's resolve. He could no longer simply analyze from afar. The spectral smile in the mirror, the forgotten faces of Oakhaven's vanished, called him to a deeper engagement. He packed a small bag, his research notes, and his camera equipment, making the decision to undertake the journey to the now abandoned village. The remote location, once a thriving community, lay nestled deep within a forgotten valley off the beaten path, a place where time had seemingly ceased its relentless march. The drive was long and arduous, the paved roads eventually giving way to rutted tracks overgrown with weeds, a clear indication of how long the village had been left to the elements and the whispers of the wind. As his vehicle bounced along the deteriorating path, fragments of the church photo danced in his mind's eye, the serene facade contrasting sharply with the malevolent grin he had painstakingly uncovered within its reflection. He had a powerful, almost spiritual sense of duty to Alara, the child whose smile had been twisted, whose innocent image had become a canvas for something sinister. He thought of her, a fleeting life captured in sepia tones, and the entity that had claimed her, now seemingly reaching across the decades, daring him to come closer. Upon arrival, the silence was almost deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of an unseen bird. Oakhaven was a ghost town, its skeletal remains of houses swallowed by encroaching vegetation, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at a world that had forgotten them. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a melancholy perfume that clung to everything. But his destination was the church, the focal point of the mystery, the silent witness to whatever had transpired all those years ago. Its steeple, once a beacon of faith, now stood as a jagged silhouette against the perpetually gray sky, its bell tower empty, its voice long silenced. The structure itself, though dilapidated, retained an imposing aura, a sense of gravitas that even decades of neglect could not fully diminish. Arthur pushed open the heavy oak doors with a groan that echoed eerily through the cavernous interior. The sudden rush of cold, stagnant air felt like a physical embrace, instantly raising goosebumps on his arms. dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced through the grimy, stained glass windows, illuminating a scene of profound desolation. Pews lay overturned, their wood splintered and rotten, hymnals scattered across the floor like forgotten prayers. The altar, once pristine, was now draped in cobwebs, its stone surface marred by moss and mildew. The unsettling silence within the church was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't merely the quiet of an empty building. It was an oppressive, heavy silence, as if the very air absorbed all sound, muffling his footsteps, making his breath seem unnaturally loud. Time here felt not just still, but warped, as if the church existed in its own temporal bubble, forever locked in the moment of its abandonment. He could almost hear the faint echoes of past sermons, the whispers of congregants, swallowed by the profound emptiness that now permeated every corner. He walked slowly down the aisle, his eyes scanning every detail, his senses heightened. The air grew colder as he approached the front, a chill that seemed to emanate not from the draft, but from an unseen presence. He moved towards where the mirror in the photograph would have stood, though no mirror remained now. He knelt, examining the floorboards, remembering the subtle carving he'd noticed in the enlarged photograph, the ancient protective ward against malevolent spirits etched into a pew. He ran his fingers along the warped wood, searching. The floorboards here were particularly loose, swollen by years of dampness. With a grunt, he managed to pry one up, revealing a small, dark recess beneath. His heart hammered in his chest. Could it be? Was he about to find something tangible, something left behind by the parishioners, a desperate attempt to ward off the trickster? Reaching into the darkness, his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it out, his breath catching in his throat. It was a locket, tarnished with age, its silver surface dulled by the passage of time. It was intricately engraved with delicate, swirling patterns, a testament to a craftsmanship long past. The small, heavy object felt impossibly significant in his hand, a tangible link to the past, a physical piece of the puzzle he had been chasing through countless digital enhancements and dusty archives. He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers trembling slightly with anticipation and a prickle of fear. With a soft click, it opened, revealing a miniature portrait tucked inside. It was Alara. Her face, in the tiny faded image, was sweet and innocent, her eyes wide, her lips hinting at the solemn smile that had first drawn him to the photograph. On the reverse side of the locket, almost imperceptible against the darkened silver, was a series of tiny, almost microscopic engravings, a cryptic inscription. It was written in a flowing, old-fashioned script nearly worn away by time, a desperate message waiting centuries to be read, to be understood. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was no ordinary trinket. This was evidence, a voice from the past whispering a terrible secret. He held his breath, knowing that the next step, the deciphering of these faint words, would change everything. The silence of the church pressed in around him, expectant, as if even the ancient stones held their breath for the truth to be unveiled. He carefully raised the locket to catch the faint light filtering through the grimy stained glass windows, his eyes straining to make out the tiny, elegant script. Each letter was a delicate etching, a whisper from another era, and Arthur felt an immense pressure to interpret every curve and cross with absolute precision. He pulled out his phone, activating its macro lens feature, and meticulously photographed the inscription from several angles. Back in his hotel room, under the brighter, albeit flickering electric light, he transferred the images to his laptop. He spent hours, eyes burning, cross-referencing the archaic script with historical calligraphy guides he'd downloaded, piecing together fragments of letters, deciphering context from partial words. It was like archaeological excavation, but for language, unearthing meaning from the dust of time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the full message slowly revealed itself, word by agonizing word. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he read the completed phrase, his breath hitching in his throat. The inscription, etched with a child's unsteady hand, yet imbued with a profound, chilling clarity, read, "They took my smile, the one in the glass. I am here, but not here. Please tell Mama." Alara. It was undeniably her plea. Her words confirmed his gravest suspicions, articulated the unspeakable horror that had plagued his research. The entity in the mirror, the one in the glass, was not just a mischievous spirit, nor a simple trickster. It was a captor, a malevolent force that had stolen Alara, manipulating her image, her very essence, for its own sinister purposes. The innocent smile, the one that had shifted from solemn to chilling, was a cruel, mocking caricature, a trophy of its victory. The faint, almost imperceptible shift he'd initially dismissed as mere optical illusion was, in fact, the entity's manifestation, its twisted artifice. A cold dread seeped into Arthur's bones, more profound and paralyzing than any fear he had known. The silence of the abandoned hotel room, usually a comfort, now felt heavy, suffocating. He understood now the true depth of Alara's plight, trapped in a reflection, a spectral prisoner in a dimension glimpsed only through polished surfaces. The locket was not just a relic. It was a final, desperate cry for help, a message sent across time, a last beacon of hope from a child lost to the shadows. He closed his eyes, picturing Alara's face, both in the miniature portrait and in the haunting photograph. Her wide, innocent eyes, now imbued with a tragic understanding, seemed to gaze directly into his soul, pleading for intervention. He felt an inexplicable, chilling presence settle over him, an almost tangible coldness that began to emanate from his laptop screen where the photograph of the church still glowed. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with an unseen energy. It wasn't the scent of old wood this time, but something metallic and faintly acrid, like ozone before a storm. He looked at the screen and his breath caught in his throat. The mirror in the photograph, usually a passive, static reflection, now shimmered with an eerie internal light, like water disturbed by an unseen current. And within that shimmering glass, the child's smile began to form, slowly at first, then widening, stretching into a grotesque, impossibly wide grin that was far too large for Alara's sweet face. It was no longer subtle, no longer ambiguous. It was an overt, undeniable manifestation directly acknowledging his discovery, his intrusion. The smile grew, consuming the reflection, mocking him. It seemed to pulse with a malevolent glee, an ancient, predatory satisfaction. The eyes in the reflection, though still Alara's, now held a terrifying, knowing glint, devoid of any childlike innocence. It wasn't Alara anymore. It was the entity wearing her face, using her image as a weapon, a taunt. The implication was clear. It knew he had deciphered the message. It was observing him, perhaps had been observing him all along, waiting for the moment he would draw too close to the truth. The photo wasn't just a window to the past. It was a living, breathing conduit, a portal through which this malevolent presence could exert its influence, a prison for Alara, and now perhaps a snare for him. A terrifying realization washed over Arthur, a profound and sickening turning point in his understanding. The photograph wasn't merely a record of a past event, a frozen moment in time showing a child and a subtle anomaly. It was actively participating. It wasn't a passive relic. It was an active player in this ancient, terrifying game. The entity was trapped within the reflection, yes, confined to that two-dimensional plane, but its influence seeped out, manipulating reality, claiming souls. Alara was not merely a victim, she was a symbol, a key to understanding the full extent of this entity's power. The photo was a prison for her, a canvas for the trickster. And now, a warning for anyone who dared to look too closely, to listen too carefully to the whispers from the glass, the shimmering reflection, the widening, horrific smile, the palpable presence in the room. It all coalesced into an undeniable truth. He was no longer just an observer, an amateur historian. He was actively engaged in a confrontation, a battle across centuries for a child's lost smile. His discovery of the locket and its message had not just unveiled a secret, it had opened a direct line of communication, a challenge thrown across the veil separating worlds. The true nature of the evil was laid bare, a cold, grinning reality reflected back at him from the church photo. The cryptic inscription, barely visible on the locket's reverse, slowly yielded its secrets under Arthur's careful eye and the focused beam of his phone's flashlight. Each letter, painstakingly deciphered, formed words that solidified his dread, yet also sharpened his resolve. Captured by the one in the glass, it read, etched in a child's shaky but determined hand. He waits in reflections. Save me. Alara's voice, silent for centuries, now echoed in the hollowed sanctuary, a chilling testament to her final moments of terror and defiance. A profound sadness washed over Arthur, a weight settling deep in his chest. This wasn't merely a historical mystery anymore, it was a desperate plea from a lost soul, a tangible connection to a tragedy that had unfolded in this very spot. As he finished reading, an unnatural stillness descended upon the already silent church, a stillness that felt less like peace and more like a predator holding its breath. The air grew colder, and a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer caught his peripheral vision. He looked up, his gaze drawn to the empty space where the grand mirror would have once stood. There, suspended in the air, a fleeting, ghostly image began to coalesce. It was the reflection from the photograph, but now untethered, vibrant, and terrifyingly present. The child's face, Alara's face, materialized, her features twisting into the hideous, familiar grin that had haunted his sleepless nights. It was wider now, an impossible stretch of malice, devoid of any childlike innocence, a gaping maw of pure malevolence. The entity was here, in the physical space, roused by his discovery, its eyes, Alara's eyes, fixed on him with an ancient, predatory intelligence. This wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a manifestation, a direct confrontation. The spectral image pulsed with an unseen energy, and the chilling sensation of being watched intensified, pressing in on him from all sides. He could feel its hunger, its age-old torment, and its twisted satisfaction at having been found, at having its secret unveiled. Alara's locket, still warm from his touch, felt almost alive in his hand, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. He knew then with absolute certainty that the photograph wasn't just a window into the past. It was a conduit, a prison for Alara, and a perverse playground for the entity. It was a potent warning, a historical artifact that actively influenced the present. The smile in the reflection wasn't just a digital anomaly. It was a living, breathing taunt, a testament to the entity's power to ensnare and torment. But Alara's message, her desperate plea, also contained the seeds of a solution. He waits in reflections. This wasn't just a statement of fact, it was a crucial piece of information about the entity's nature, its vulnerability. Rooted in folklore, these trickster spirits often had a symbiotic relationship with their chosen medium. The protective wards, the local legends of mischievous spirits manifesting in reflections, all of it clicked into place. The church's original inhabitants hadn't just feared this entity, they had understood its limitations. Arthur, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, understood what he had to do. The locket had been Alara's last message, a desperate cry for deliverance. Now it would be his tool for retribution, a final act of protection. He held the locket tightly, the small, cold metal a grounding force in the supernatural maelstrom. He thought back to the symbols he'd meticulously studied, the ancient protective wards carved into the pews, designed to repel malevolent reflections, to bind and neutralize the power of such entities. He couldn't destroy the entity, but he could perhaps contain it, sever its influence over Alara's imprisoned image. With a surge of newfound determination, Arthur located the exact spot where the mirror would have stood, directly opposite the altar. He remembered the faint markings on the wall where its frame would have been anchored. This was the entity's nexus, its point of connection to the world, its eternal vantage point over Alara's suffering. He carefully removed one of the loose floorboards again, creating a small, hidden cavity. This was the place. He took a deep, steadying breath, then placed Alara's locket within the makeshift cavity. It wasn't a grand ritual, no incantations or elaborate ceremonies, just a singular act of intent, a connection of old knowledge and modern purpose. As the locket settled into its new resting place, he imagined the protective energies of the wards, the desperate prayers of the villagers now flowing through this simple act. He resealed the floorboards, silently vowing that this time Alara's voice would not be ignored, her suffering not forgotten. A profound, almost palpable shift occurred. The suffocating cold began to recede, replaced by a neutral, albeit still chilly, air. The oppressive silence eased, losing its menacing edge. Arthur looked back at the space where the spectral reflection had hovered. It was gone. He pulled out the original photograph from his satchel, his hands trembling slightly, and gazed at the mirror within the image. The chilling, malevolent grin, the one that had tormented him for so long, was no longer there. In its place, for a fleeting moment, was a faint, sorrowful expression on Alara's face, a hint of resignation, perhaps even a flicker of gratitude. Then even that faded, leaving the reflection serene, almost blank, a simple, unanimated image of the church interior. The smile was gone, banished, its power neutralized. The entity, whatever it was no longer present in the reflection, its influence over Alara's image broken. Arthur knew Alara might never truly be free in the conventional sense, her physical self lost to history, but her story was known now, her silent screams finally heard across centuries. The entity's grip, its ability to manifest through her image, was severed. Her memory was no longer a tool for a malevolent force, but a testament to a forgotten tragedy brought to light by a persistent amateur historian. This journey had been more than just historical research. It had been an act of reclamation, a quiet heroism against a forgotten darkness. He carefully packed away the photograph, a sense of weary peace settling over him. He had faced the unknown, deciphered a centuries-old mystery, and in his own way, brought a measure of closure to a tormented past. The church still stood silent and ancient, but its oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by a solemn quiet. Arthur emerged from the church, blinking in the fading sunlight, forever changed by his encounter with Alara and the entity in the glass. This adventure had reinforced his belief that history was not just dates and facts, but a living, breathing tapestry woven with human experiences, emotions, and sometimes unexplained phenomena. It was a testament to the importance of remembering forgotten histories, of looking deeper, of seeking the hidden truths that lie beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary artifacts. He would share Alara's story not as a sensational ghost tale, but as a poignant reminder of the unseen forces that sometimes shaped human lives and the quiet courage it took to confront them. Thank you for joining me on this extraordinary journey through time and mystery. If Alara's story resonated with you, if you appreciate the uncovering of hidden truths and the delving into the unknown, please take a moment to like this video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows me to continue exploring these captivating enigmas from our past. Next time, we'll dive into another perplexing artifact, a forgotten diary that whispers secrets of a vanished expedition. Until then, keep looking closely at the details because sometimes the most profound stories are hidden in plain sight.